السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. عادة بنسأل هي أوروبا موقفها إيه من مصر؟ أوروبا عايزة إيه من مصر؟ نتعامل مع أوروبا وكأنها كتلة واحدة وكيان واحد. حسب اتفاق ماستريخت اللي تم توقيعه في 92 أصبح هناك اتحاد أوروبي، ولكن هل معنى هذا الكلام أن الاتحاد الأوروبي يتحرك كوحدة واحدة؟ شفنا في مواقف كثيرة جدا، وكان لنتذكرها طبعا بشدة مواقف حرب على العراق عندما انضمت بعض الدول الأوروبية لهذه الحرب واختلفت بعض الدول الأخرى ولم تشارك في الحرب. ده معناه أن الاتحاد الأوروبي مش دائما بيتحرك ككتلة واحدة، ولكن الاتحاد الأوروبي عنده البرلمان الأوروبي وعنده مفوضية للاتحاد الأوروبي وعنده من يمثله في الخارج. إذن هو أيضا كيان. يمثل من هذا الكيان وعلى أي أساس نتعامل مع هذا الكيان ويتعامل معنا؟ عشان كده كل الأسئلة دي هطرحها على سعادة السفير جيمس مورن، سفير الاتحاد الأوروبي في القاهرة. I'm welcoming you, sir.
أهلا وسهلا.
أهلا بيك. So to start with, I mean, we're talking about Europe and we're talking about independent states. The Maastricht Treaty speaks about independence of states, but at the same time there is the whole of Europe that moves sometimes as a body. When does this happen and when does that happen?
Well, I mean, we try to achieve a common position as the European Union, the 28 countries of the European Union, in all aspects of international affairs and our relations with our partners and our friends around the world. We don't always succeed, but there is a very strong political will within Europe to do that. And in today's world, in today's globalized world, there really is no alternative. As I say, we don't always succeed. We try very much to do it. I think in this part of the world, if you look at Palestine, for example, you'll see a pretty common European and common and consistent position over the years in favor of the two-state solution, in favor of an independent Palestinian state. Good example, perhaps, of a long-term common view. And in other parts of the region as well, for example, how to deal with the Libyan crisis. There too, I think you'll see a pretty common European approach. So that's the objective. We don't always reach it. We do the best we can, but we always try.
All right. Just trying to touch on, trying to understand how it works. I mean, you've just given us a pretty interesting view, but each state independently would like to bring the best to its citizens. Mm-hmm. Who does the EU work for? The best of all the citizens of the 28 nations, even though sometimes the decisions would contradict with one or more nations?
We try, of course, to work for the benefit of all European citizens. You know, you can't please all the people all the time. That's true everywhere. Even if you take an individual country, a sovereign state, the same sorts of difficulties occur. But that's the objective. I think over the 50 or more years of the European Union, you have many, many examples of where we've managed to do that. For example, we have a common approach on trade. We work together on trade as the 28. Sometimes we don't all agree, but we have majority voting when it comes to trade, which is the responsibility of the European institutions at the end of the day to conduct trade agreements and negotiations with our partners. We did this here in Egypt over the last 10, 15 years. And by the way, we can talk about this later. We'd like to do more. We do that as Europe. We do it to the benefit of all. There are always some who perhaps do not get what they want, and that's inevitable.
Independently, when one European state takes an action that may not be in line with what the rest of the EU believes, how do you react to that?
We have had some instances in the past inside Europe of this happening. Internally within the European Union, we have had some experiences of one or two member states over the years who have had governments which have not conformed to the what is known as the European acquis, to the system of laws and values that you sign up to when you join the European Union. We have dealt with those matters along the way, sometimes by using a certain amount of sanction sometimes, but mainly by persuasion. Because at the end of the day, discussion and dialogue within the European Union usually produces the solution. But again, there have been bumps along the way, and it's inevitable.
Let me give an example. Yesterday, Germany has decided to ban any kind of arms to be dealt or traded with Saudi Arabia. And this may certainly, I believe, affect EU relations at large with Saudi Arabia. How do you deal with such a thing?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, I've seen these reports. I have not seen the details of these reports. They've come out in the press yesterday. I saw some television reporting last night. As of today, I don't know the detail of this. So the first thing to say is that I think we better wait and see what the details of this decision actually are. But there are matters where sovereign states within Europe act as sovereign states. It's not all agreed with the rest of Europe. And there is certainly a body of activity in foreign affairs as well as in domestic affairs sometimes too, which does not come under the remit of agreeing everything with the rest of the European Union. In other words, the sovereign state still has space to act as a sovereign state within Europe. Although it must be said that in the great majority of cases, everybody sees it in their interest to act as one. But on that particular instance, we need to know more about that report yesterday.
Let me just put it this way. I believe you've been, how long have you been here in Cairo?
It'll be 3 years next month.
Okay. So saying that, I mean, you must have been doing a great job, because now Egyptians look at the EU as the EU. I mean, we look at Europe as one entity. So when something comes out of Europe, no matter where it comes out, and people would feel that it is not in their interest or in their interest, they would believe, haha, Europe is doing that. They don't say anymore, France is doing that, Italy is doing that, it's Europe. So credit goes to you for making the EU very much in the conscience of Egyptians. So how does that work out now, that people are not very happy with the European stance?
I don't know. It depends on, first of all, thank you for the compliment that you give. Although I must say that, I do think Egyptians as a whole, because of all of the myriad connections the Egyptian people have with different countries of Europe, and not just at the elite level. I mean, you see this all over the country. It's one of the nice things about being here. There is a familiarity in Egypt, which I don't think you'll find almost anywhere else in the region. Familiarity with Europe, with its complications, with its history, with its different countries and so forth. So I do think that most Egyptians do distinguish between each individual country and the EU. That's my impression in any event. That's the first thing. The second thing on EU positions, I'm not sure that the reaction is entirely negative. I think we've had also some positives over the last year or two. We've had, for example, attention to Egypt on a scale which we've never seen before at the EU level, and the previous High Representative Catherine Ashton made some 16 visits to Egypt over the last 3 years. Only one country was visited more by her, and that was the United States.
And you believe and you know that Egyptians frowned at all these visits?
Well, I don't think that's true. I think certainly there were one or two visits which I know were controversial, but there were others which certainly our impression was were well received. Not just by the leaders. I think there was a certain amount of affinity.
I'm not talking leaders. I'm talking only people.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Look, our impression was that on a number of these visits, it was appreciated, and certainly the quality of the dialogue that we had and have with Egypt as a whole, not just at the political level, but also at the street level as well, and throughout the civil society here, has been pretty rich. Not always agreeing, you're right, I mean, that's true. But there is a huge amount of attention given to this country, and I think with good reason, because more than ever, this country has to succeed. This country must succeed, and we want that to happen.
I am sure of your sincerity about that particular statement that you've just made. I'm sure you are. But at the same time, I've read your comments in one of the newspapers about how independent the European Parliament is from the EU foreign policies. How is that first? Because that was not very elaborate.
EU foreign policy is made up of three components. You have the institutions, the European Commission and the Action Service, and the European Council, which is made up of the member states. You have the member states themselves as a second element, and thirdly you have the European Parliament. The European Parliament is one amongst a number of elements when it comes to these matters of foreign affairs in particular. There are some areas where Parliament does have authority, but in foreign affairs it's one amongst a number of elements. And I think that one of the problems at the moment here in Egypt in understanding the European Parliament is that you haven't had a parliament sitting in Egypt for at least a couple of years now, for reasons we all know. You've got an election coming up in a month or two. You will have parliamentarians back in their seats, all being well, by May. And then it will be possible, I hope, to have parliamentarians talking to parliamentarians and explaining to their people what it's all about. One of the difficulties we've had the last year or two has been exactly that. You know parliamentarians. They are a special breed of people in any country, including this one. They like to talk to other parliamentarians. In Egypt, this has been impossible, essentially, for the last couple of years. So the sooner you have your parliament in place, I think the better understanding will be possible between the legislatures on both sides. We're suffering a bit from a lack of communication there.
What's the European Parliament made of? How do you elect the Parliament, the European Parliament?
It's directly elected in all the 28 member countries of the EU. Some 730 odd seats, allocated more or less according to population. So the largest component would come from Germany, which has the largest population. And I should think the smallest would be Luxembourg or Malta, which has 5 or 6 MEPs. And they're all elected every 5 years by a direct election. And the last one, of course, being about 6 months ago.
And it is not related to the national sovereign state parliaments?
It is related in the sense that they have a strong interaction, and many parliamentarians from the national parliaments go to the European Parliament and vice versa over the years. Yes, it is related, but it does have independent authority. It is sovereign in its own right. With a democratic mandate.
If you would want to answer my coming question, please just let me know. I mean, you said parliamentarians need to talk to parliamentarians, and because we haven't had a parliament since 2012, then we need to have a parliament in order for parliamentarians to speak to parliamentarians. So on which basis are the European parliamentarians speaking to the Muslim Brotherhoods? They're not parliamentarians, and they are speaking to them, and you know that they are speaking to them. And you're free not to answer the question.
Well, yes, I mean, it's no secret that from time to time some parliamentarians will be speaking to members of the Ikhwan. This has happened, and I think it's been in the press, and some of them make some publicity from it and so on and so forth. The European Parliament is a very wide-ranging body with a lot of different political views within it, from far out on the left to pretty far out on the right now as well. You have many different strains within the Parliament, which is as parliaments are.
Where do they get their information?
They get their information certainly from civil society connections. They get them from other parliamentarians in Europe and around the area. They get their information from visits and so on and so forth, which they carry out from time to time from all sorts of different sources. We do the best we can to keep them up to speed, but they don't always listen to us.
I'm not trying to make the comparison, because the comparison would be definitely unfair. But I look at the British Parliament, which was misinformed by the British Foreign Office, which was misinformed by the British ambassador, the former British ambassador in Cairo, James Watts, that the Foreign Office in the UK had to apologize to the Parliament because it misinformed them. Where do you stand in informing the Parliament?
We regularly inform the Parliament on events. I myself, whenever I go to Brussels, will pass by and I will give them a perspective on what has been happening here. I do my very best to fill them in on the issues of the day, and of course there are very many of them, whether it be trade, whether it be human rights, whether it be democratic transition, you name it. Parliamentarians are interested in it. There's a huge amount of interest in the Parliament in what goes on in Egypt. Either way, I think probably more than 100 of them out of the 700 are watching the country very, very closely. Some are better informed than others, is all I can say. But there is this missing element, and I want to go back to that again. It is extremely important. When your parliament is in place in a few months' time, it's very, very important that it organizes itself to send delegations over to Brussels and also to encourage them to come here more often so they can talk and sit together and get a better understanding, better information directly from like to like, apple to apple, orange to orange.
Okay, now that I know, or as you said, you inform them as much as possible, have you been informing them with whose point of view? Government's point of view, people's point of view, MB's point of view?
Well, you try to give them as objective a view as you can, given the complexity of this country. Of course, the government's view is there for all to see, and one takes that into account. But you must also try, doing the job that I do in Egypt, it's incumbent upon me, as best I can, to try to reflect wider views within the country. So we do have a lot of connections with civil society, for example, in the country. So yes, I also listen very carefully to what they have to say, and it's a very broad spectrum. Mm-hmm. There are some parts of civil society which, as you know, is very pro-government, others much less so. It's important to try to tease out all of the different views from civil society and transmit them across to the other side. We do that, we try to do that. Believe you me, I think these last 2 or 3 years, that's been one of the most challenging things about being in Egypt, to get all of these different views across. Mm-hmm. All I can say is, Ossama, we do our best to do that.
Can I say that the statement that came out of the Parliament on the 15th of January was based on information you gave them, or based on your points of view that you collected from the wide spectrum of the civil society?
Frankly, I can't give you a precise answer, because they, in doing that, would have taken information from all sorts of different elements, including the different parties within the European Parliament. You have, as I said, you have right, you have left, you have centrist, you have nationalist, you have even anti-EU parties in the Parliament after the last election. So an awful lot of ingredients would have been put into the pot when that resolution was being put together. One of them perhaps was ours, as it were, the institutions giving them the information we had, but it certainly wasn't the only one. And, as I said, to be expected in our system, where Parliament is sovereign and has its own point of view and expresses it.
Do you have the right to send them an objection saying this harms our foreign policy, that you come up with such a statement that is so biased?
What we always say is that whatever resolution comes out of the European Parliament, and I'm not sure you can say that the statement was entirely biased, it was certainly very broad-ranging. If you want to get into the detail of that, we can, but what you can say is that we want to be helpful in the transition of this country. We want, as I said, to see this country make good again. We want to see it get back to business. We want to see stability, and we would love to have Egypt enjoy the fruits of democracy in the longer term. We know that is taking time. We know it's difficult, but we want that. And so whatever comes out, what I would say and what I will say is that please, let's try to be as helpful as we possibly can, and constructively critical where we need to be.
How can you be of help?
Well, in many, many ways, we are helping at the moment.
We know the economic part, okay?
Yeah,
and,
sure.
and we'll get to that, of course.
Sure.
But I mean, how else? You want us to see the fruits of what's happening, to become more democratic and all this. What are you going to do?
Well, again, I mean, we're not...
Other than financing some...
We're not there yet.
Society.
For example, we're not there yet, but you've got a parliamentary election coming up. Let me give you an example there. We actually started to do a little bit of this in the past with the
That's
previous
the parliament, the coming parliament, that you don't want to monitor.
Your coming parliament. No, we will have engagement. We will have electoral experts here, which will be there for the election process. But it's not that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the long term, talking about the years to come, because the country desperately needs continuity. We all know that. When it comes to the functioning of the parliament here in Egypt, there may well be, and we know this from previous exchanges with serious parliamentarians last time, there may well be a lot of areas where we might be able to bring some best practice directly from European politicians, but also from bureaucracies of parliaments as well, in terms of making, helping to make the parliament here more efficient and more effective in the years to come. And we would offer that, I'm sure, to the new parliament when it's sitting, if they want it fine. If they don't, they don't. But we would want to help the Parliament to be effective and efficient and to fulfill its role under your very good constitution, because your constitution has now given the Egyptian Parliament a very important role in the governance of the country. And I think it is crucial, I think we all think it's crucial, that Parliament does its job and does its bit to enact what you have under the Constitution to improve the governance and efficiency of the country. So we will offer these things when you have a sitting Parliament.
So my sense is Europe is awaiting the Parliament in order to move forward with Egypt.
Well, I think we move forward where we can, when we can at the moment. But once your Parliament is sitting, once it's in place, I think it will make things a lot easier in terms of moving on to the next chapter in the long 2,500-year story of European-Egyptian relations.
Do you believe that the fact that we have the economic conference that's happening in Sharm el-Sheikh in March, ahead of the parliamentary elections, this will negatively affect European contribution to the conference?
I'm not so sure that that will be the case. I think there's a lot of interest in the conference. Interest from politicians, interest from businesses. Remember, Europe is still the #1 foreign direct investor in the country, and probably will be for a very long time to come. A lot of opportunities are arising here in Egypt, not just economic ones. We have a big role to play as a friend of this country in that conference, and I'm sure that'll be the case. I know ideally it maybe would have been the best solution to have had everything in place before doing it, but you know, life is life and things sometimes take longer than they should, and I understand the authorities' impatience to get on with things, to get economic development moving in the country. So we will participate, and our companies will be there, our politicians will be there, I am sure.
They will be there, but do you think they will not have their decisions ready, set and made until there is a parliament and the new government is in shape?
I don't think it's only about politics. It's also about economics, and it's about legislation and so on. So, for example, there's a new investment law which has been talked about for quite some time. The Prime Minister, I know, is on record as saying that we can expect it pretty soon. A lot of things need to be done. You still have laws on the books dating from Muhammad Ali, which affect investment here. By all accounts, this will improve things. Let's hope it comes out well in advance of the conference. That's an important factor as well, especially for the companies, but more broadly too, for trading relations between Egypt and the rest of the world, and especially with us in Europe. So it's not just about having a parliament in place. There are other things as well.
Like legislation, as you said?
Like this sort of legislation, which would be, which would encourage investors to come. So number of things there, but we hope that there will be some meat on the table in time for March.
So what's your message here to Europe? I mean, what are you sending out, you yourself, to Europe about the conference? Telling them what? Do come, wait, hold, skeptical? What? What do you tell them?
The message, I think, and I dare say you'll hear the same from my colleagues in the European Union embassies here in Cairo. The message is that we should definitely come, we should participate, we should get the best possible attendance, and we should be as supportive as we can to economic recovery in the country. But of course, it's a two-way street. In order to do that, a few things need to happen in the meantime, especially that legislation, which will help enormously, because especially business people, of course, will be looking for this. They will be looking for something on the table that they can actually deal with in terms of their investment plans going forward. In any event, I am sure you're going to see an awful lot of contracts signed during the conference. I'm sure that's going to happen. But the number and quality of contracts is also depending on further moves to be taken by the authorities here.
Now that we got into economics, so let's stay there for a bit and then go back to politics. You've been asked about the top priorities of the EU in investment here in Egypt or in supporting Egypt economically, and you spoke about transport and electricity and water being the top 3 priorities that you've had recently. Is it because these fields, they lack a lot, or these fields lack a lot because of your subsidy? Or how do you take it?
Well, I think everybody here in Egypt knows that there's a great deal to be done on just about every front. The President said it, and many others have said it too. We all understand the enormity of the
We
challenge
live here.
that's coming in.
We
You
feel
live
it,
here,
yeah.
and I live among you, so I see it also myself, not perhaps in the same way as an Egyptian does, but I certainly feel for it. And by the way, these priorities are certainly very important, but two more I would add to that, which are extremely important. Education and health, which are areas in which we are working here in Egypt, especially in Upper Egypt and around the Delta, in some of the more underprivileged governorates. Lots to do there as well, especially education.
When you help, what do you do when you help? Is it financial? Is it technical assistance? Do you send in experts? Do you build schools? What do you do?
It's all these things. It's all these things. And more. And because, for example, we have a new program which we announced 2 or 3 months ago, which is a big program of some 60 million euros, about 500 million Egyptian pounds, for school feeding, especially in Upper Egypt. This is crucial for young kids, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old.
In order to stay in school and for the nutrition as
and
well.
especially for the girls, because we know, and I think everybody here knows, that when push comes to shove and people are suffering, and they are suffering down there, we know that for all sorts of reasons, the tourism downturn, etc., the girls tend to get the short end of the stick. They tend not to go to school. So we're trying to help there by putting money into free school meals for large numbers, hundreds of thousands of kids in school, as well as building schools, as well as supporting the education authorities here to try to come up with a longer-term strategy for education improvement in the country. And good heavens, they have so much work to do. The EU itself is a small part of the issue. I think you need all the support you can get from around the world. And I think above all, and again I go back to the Constitution, unusually in your Constitution you have stipulations saying that so much of GDP must be spent on health and education. This may not be the norm for around the world, but I understand where people came from, because for a long time
they just felt that the need is there.
Absolutely, and I think it is there. Enormous needs are there. And I only hope that, again, this will depend a little bit on Parliament. I only hope that it can be made real. So much to do.
Okay, what about those 5 billion euros that were coming in during the times of the Muslim Brotherhood and Mohammed Morsi, and then all of a sudden you decided not to give them in, and then I also read one of your statements that they are now pending the approval of the IMF.
Well, we pledged 5.5 billion euros in November 2012 at what was then called the EU-Egypt Task Force at the time of the Morsi administration. And it wasn't really about the administration of the day, it was to meet the needs of the country. What actually happened was that well over half of that money actually came into the country. It really did arrive, because it was coming from the European Investment Bank in terms of concessional loans, who have extended close to 2 billion in that time period, and also from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which opened up shop here about a year ago, and over this past year has put in close to 1 billion into the country. So in fact, of that 5.5 billion, over half of it has been delivered in a number of different projects in a number of different areas by those banks. And we've been using our grant money, our gifts, our donations from the European Commission to help very often with softening those loans so that the burden of interest and the rest on the state here is absolutely minimized in all sorts of areas, including some of the areas we talked about before. So a large part of that has been delivered. 10% of it, 500 million, was dependent on an agreement with the IMF. It never happened. We were told in 2012 that it would, but that particular administration could not deliver. And since then, for understandable reasons, given all the changes, the roadmap and everything else, it's not been possible for the country to actually achieve that agreement. And I think it will still take a little time. What is good, what is really good, by the way, amongst many other things on the big picture economic issues, is that relations between Egypt and the international financial institutions, the IMF, the World Bank and so on, have improved immensely over the last 6-9 months. You've just had the first IMF mission here for many, many years doing its routine work. This is very, very helpful, not only for the institutions, the IFIs, but also for the rest of us. Everybody looks to these people in terms of their judgments and all the rest on the economy. And I have to congratulate the government, particularly the Ministry of Finance, but others too, on achieving that. That is very good. And that sets it up well for the next few years if we get a bit of continuity now.
So you want to tell me that whatever came out of the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development and other organizations affiliated to the EU would not have come had it not been for the 5.5 billion euro agreement? I mean, they would have, if you had not announced those 5.5 billion, they would have been standing still doing nothing.
No, they would have been continuing with their operations.
So there must have been something else that they worked with. It's not those 5.5 billion.
Well, no, it is partly because they have raised their game since 2012. They're doing more, and the EBRD was doing nothing. It didn't exist in 2012. It was not open for business. It is open for business now, and it will be fully open for business, I hope, later on this year, after the parliamentary election, with any luck. But the EIB has done more than was foreseen over these 2 years. So that particular event helped. The problem was that it took place in November 2012, a week before November the 22nd, when everything changed, when the Morsi administration did what it did and made that constitutional declaration and made life very, very difficult for continuity. But even despite that, and everything that followed, it was possible for them to keep moving on, doing more than they'd done in previous years.
So it all stopped because of the Morsi amendments to the Constitution.
Well, it didn't all stop
the
because
Constitution.
Of that.
I mean, this is where the problem started. Huh?
Well, the problem with the full delivery, I think, of all of that 5.5 billion, part of it was that just shortly after we had that task force, these momentous events took place in the country, leading eventually, of course, to what happened in 2013.
I'm trying to figure out, so you saw that the former president, Morsi, had done something wrong that led to all these consequences afterwards. How come you were so worried about him? Mrs. Ashton came to visit him in his... Nobody from Europe came to visit former President Mubarak. You just visited Morsi, you wanted to know where he is and so on, even though you know that he started everything with this constitutional declaration.
Well, the constitutional declaration was a major step back for the country. There's no question about that. The visit made to former President Morsi in July 2013 was done on a humanitarian basis, no more than that. And she wanted to just make sure that he was being well taken care of, and she found that he was. The reports came out in the press at the time. It was simple as that.
His fridge was full. The report said that fridge was full. Didn't they say that?
I believe it did. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, okay, let's go back to politics. I just can't help it. Okay. All right. Now let's take a look at what's happening now. Every sentence or every question I asked you, the words, the coming parliament was there in a way or another, right?
Yeah.
So parliament to the EU is a very important milestone in the future of relations between Europe and Egypt. How come you're not trying to exert more efforts in order to send a proper monitoring body here? Are you sending a message to the world that the coming elections are being rigged and you don't want to be part of it?
No.
Or they are insignificant? Or you don't have the time? Or you don't have the resources? What is the message?
The difficulty with this is, no, we don't think for a moment these elections will be rigged. We know they won't be rigged. This country has had more experience of elections probably than any other over the last 4 years.
Of course, we've had elections
you've had every 6 months you've had voting. We've been there with a full observer mission for the presidential election. We were there with experts for the constitutional referendum. And I think we've come to a pretty good understanding of how things work in this country when it comes to elections.
Or is it also because of problems that happened with the presidential elections?
Let me get to that.
Last time.
Let me get to that. There's no concern about rigging of elections. We do not have that concern. The difficulty we've got is that the time that we have to launch a proper observation mission, which means hundreds of people arriving 6 weeks before the vote, and also more of them to arrive on the day. The problem we have there is partly an operational one, because we just don't have the time to do it. And if we need at least 3 or 4 months warning of this to do it. And if we were to launch it, we could, even last week when we were clear about this, about the timing of everything, to be in place, everybody in place, you need people arriving right now, deployed around the country. There's a lot of other things they need as well, which sometimes cause some difficulties here. I think it was no secret last year we had some difficulties getting special equipment through for them.
Can you tell me what the special equipments are? Because nobody ever spoke about them.
The main problem was with satellite telephones. Last time, we do not, anywhere in the world, we have a standard methodology, one size fits all. Sorry to say it, but it is. It's very purist. Anywhere in the world, wherever you have election observers from the European Union, it is absolutely essential that each one of them has an independently connected satellite phone. For security reasons, because things happen. Things happen during elections, here in Egypt, everywhere. In Europe too sometimes. You have to have independent communications. This is difficult. This is difficult for your security services, especially under present circumstances and so on. So each time you do this, you need to have these people out in the countryside with their phones, with their communications equipment and so on. And that proved a problem last time, and it could well prove a problem again this time, because each time it depends on the circumstances prevailing in the country. In other words, it's a big risk. If you send an observation mission that can't do its job, you could do more damage than good in terms of supporting the process. So the compromise is we will send out experts, they'll work with the parties, they'll work with the Electoral Commission, they'll talk to the government people, they'll talk to civil society. I hope we can do a little bit on the media as well, just to follow the process to be as helpful as we can. That's a major element. And then, you know, the observer mission for the presidential election did say that the environment, there was no problem with the vote, but the environment for the vote was problematic. And there too, a number of people have
made the
argument. What does that mean? Well, the general environment, the openness for political parties to do what they normally would do in a parliamentary election. The coverage in the media. The coverage in the media was monitored very closely last time. And there were some difficulties there as well in terms of making sure that all the parties had access and so forth. I'm afraid maybe we're applying European standards, which we shouldn't do. But it's all part of the methodology of these observation missions that these things are monitored. And this is also problematic. But frankly speaking, the main difficulty is that we do not want to launch something we can't do properly. Then you end up doing more harm than good to the country and to yourselves.
So is this your message that goes back to Europe, that we will not monitor because we're not ready, not because the atmosphere is not favorable?
It's a little bit of both aspects. I mean, if the atmosphere, the environment was more propitious for the operation of political parties and everything else, that would certainly be helpful, but we would still have a problem with the operational side. There's a technical side which is important here. You do not, as I say, you really don't want to launch something that can't be delivered. Nothing worse. So the compromise is to send out the experts.
You were meeting with Dr. Said Badawi and Mr. Hamdain Sabahi.
Yeah.
And this is, of course, this must be related to the elections,
very much
right?
so.
So what is the message that you received, and what have you discussed in that sense? And is this one of the reasons you came up with the idea that we're not really set to give all parties the proper environment to work in the coming elections?
Yeah, this is normal in the run-up to any election, that one would want to get a good understanding of where the different parties are coming from. And what are their policies? What are the prospects for coalitions, because you have so many parties in the country, to get an understanding of which direction they're moving in. And this is why, just as we did a couple of years ago with the previous election, just as we did with the presidential election, when we saw the candidates then, last year, and indeed previously in 2012, to get a proper understanding. This goes back to the point about information, so that you can get good information back to your principals back in Europe, to let them know how things are moving along. And it must be said that it seems that there are many challenges, and I think the party leaders are challenged at the moment, all of them, to try to come up with common strategies, coalitions and so forth, so that they can have a successful election. They still seem to have a bit of work to do. There are many lists, of course, that are around, both for the party component and for the individual component. it's a pretty complicated system that you have here in Egypt. There's no shortage of diversity, and there's no shortage of diversity of view either. But this is the reason why one does this at this time.
So what did they say?
Well, I think it would be certainly not correct for me to...
I mean, in general, what's the message? That they have challenges,
well, I think
that's it?
there are great challenges, but I think there's a real effort going on to try to come together as best they can. I don't think there's going to be one list, which I think was spoken about at one time. I totally
don't believe in that, and I don't believe that.
Well, in effect, if you had one list, then you might ask the question, why have an election in the first place? But you need opposing views, of course. There does seem to be some progress being made, I think, between them on coming up with common lists. But the system itself is not easy, with the individual member constituencies, of course, where families, of course, will play a big role, and everybody's aware of it around the countryside in particular. It will be hard, I think, for the parties to break through. And the system, with only, 20% of the seats going to parties as such, is not necessarily helpful to the development of political parties. Although I think they have come on a bit, if I may say so, in the last 2 or 3 years. There seems to be a better understanding of the need to work together around common policies and common themes for the future. One would hope that, next time around, maybe 4 or 5 years from now, it might be possible to have more space for the parties to develop, because if you really want to have some sort of democracy, whatever it is, whether it's whichever model, it will be an Egyptian solution. But I don't know of any democracy which works properly, at least on the legislative side, if it doesn't have organized political parties. And here in Egypt, you still seem to have a lot of work to do. They're aware of that.
Did you give them some advice how to get stronger?
Who am I? Who am I to give them advice?
You're the EU ambassador.
I'm the EU ambassador, but I'm not the Egyptian people. And, as helpful as you want to be, main thing for me is to listen to them, not for them to listen to me.
Right. 25th of January 2015.
Yeah.
9 p.m., you sat to your desk with your fountain pen or your computer, writing a report to Brussels. What did you say? I mean, I'm just imagining that you did that, but I mean, what would you say about what happened on the 4th anniversary of the revolution?
Well, I think the first thing is that you've got to feel, you really have to feel for the families of those who were killed and injured yesterday. All of them. Mm-hmm. Whether they were activists, whether they were security services, because everybody lost out yesterday. Mm-hmm. The last report I saw showed 18 people dead. That's 18 too many, and 100 plus injured. This is very, very sad for the country. Especially when it's a day which you would normally think would be celebrated.
Jubilation. Yeah.
Jubilation. I mean, it was. We all remember, the whole world remembers 4 years ago. So this was very sad. Some people have said, well, it's not as bad as last year, when you also had some troubles on Revolution Day. I know that. But that's the first thing to say. The second thing, I think, is that you hope very much that the country will be able to move on very quickly from this, because you have a lot of challenges ahead of you. So, for example, I know the investigations are underway in 1 or 2 cases. We read about it this morning. The tragic death of Ossama the lady, the very popular lady. Didn't know her myself, but I know people who know her, who was tragically killed the other day. Those investigations need to move on, and move on quickly, and to be done in a transparent and objective way. So I hope that that will happen, and I hope that the country will swiftly move on now to, to a political process. Not the street. The street is the street, and of course it's a hugely important factor in whatever happens in Egypt. But sorry to say it again, but I mean, these arguments are best had around the table, and once again, the Parliament hopefully will provide an outlet for people's worries, frustrations, and hopes very soon.
Violence on the streets compared to violence in Europe, terrorism in Europe, terrorism on the streets of Cairo and Egypt at large.
Yeah.
Correlation. You would not write that in that report with your fountain pen, 9 p.m., 25th of January 2015. You wouldn't say, I see something on the streets of Cairo similar to what I see on the streets of Belgium, France, or Germany.
Terrorism is terrorism wherever it occurs.
Have you seen terrorism on the 25th of January on the streets, or it was just activists?
I don't know.
Have you seen bombs?
Well, there have certainly been some bombs and explosions. I saw that certainly last night on the television reports, and I've heard about it this morning.
And this is done by activists?
I don't know. And
the user of a bomb is A, activist, B, terrorist, C, none of the above.
Yeah. Let me be clear, though. Let me be absolutely clear. If it's terrorism, and it may well have been, if it's terrorism, we must all fight it. We must all be against it. We've been very clear about that. The parliamentary resolution was clear about that. Very clear about that. And we need to cooperate and do more together to fight it. We had a couple of important visits in the last couple of months in that regard. And here you work both with the individual countries of the European Union and you work with the EU as a whole. We're looking now at ways where we can do more to stop this scourge and however we can help here in the country and internationally, because we have common interests to fight terror outside of the borders of Egypt as well. We both have a problem with foreign fighters, for example, young men, young misled men in Europe going off to Syria, to Iraq. You've got a few Egyptians doing it as well. You have some others from the region. We have a lot of common issues there, a lot of common challenges we need to work on. But there's no doubt about it. Terrorism, no, 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 never. And we must fight it.
I'm just trying to find out if we have the same definition for terrorism or not. A person carrying a bomb is a terrorist or no?
Certainly somebody who has a bomb and has the intention of blowing up innocent civilians.
Why would anybody be carrying a bomb unless he's using it in order to kill somebody?
Well, I mean, this is the point. I mean, if it happens like that, if the bomb goes off,
how else can it happen? I mean, having a bomb to celebrate a person's birthday?
No, come on. I mean, don't split hairs. If the guy or somebody has a bomb and is certainly going to use it and is going to blow up people, even if he's not going to use it, for heaven's sake, sure, this has to be stopped. Clear.
I mean, you must have seen also on television civilians carrying guns.
Well, I don't know. I mean, different reports. Certainly some of them were. And some of them were apparently helping also the security services. There's a couple of pictures in the papers this morning showing civilians with guns who were apparently drawn in to help out in some way, shape or form to control things. So, complicated. But look, I mean, the country has to move on from this. Has to get away from this. There's no doubt about it. This is very, very negative, very detrimental. At a time when you do now have a chance of some continuity and getting back to business as usual. Maybe not as usual, but better business in future.
One of my favorite sayings, at the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but we'll remember the silence of our friends. I believe that there is some kind of a silence by Europe in issues when Europe needs to speak out because of the very, very strong relation that binds us together culturally, economically, in every sense. Everybody is proud to speak English or French or German. I mean, we are part of the same culture, Europe and Egypt in particular. Not Egypt, not the Middle East and Europe, but it's Egypt. So that kind of silence and that kind of not wanting to side clearly with the will of the people, the majority of the people, is honestly bearing question marks that cannot be removed.
You know, it's important here, talking about the events over the weekend, to make the distinction between peaceful protest, I mean genuinely peaceful protest, and other types of activity. And there's a problem here, and there's a problem for all of us here in terms of squaring this circle. But when you talk about speaking out, we have spoken out on a number of occasions. We spoke out when the 30-odd young guys were killed up in northern Sinai a couple of months ago. You remember that dreadful incident where ABM let off an IED and a horrible loss of life. We spoke out again a month or two before that when you had the incident outside the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we do it regularly. When this happens, we do speak up, we condemn it, and we condemn it in an unqualified manner, because that sort of thing is absolutely intolerable. Let's be clear about that. We need to fight against it. But On the other side, you have some difficulties, clearly, with grey areas. And we have it in Europe as well. Some of the greyer areas where it isn't necessarily obviously terrorism, where it may be something else. And it's not easy for anyone, neither politicians nor security services, nor for ordinary people sometimes, to get that clear in their minds. Who's peaceful, who's not? Who's peaceful should be allowed to do legitimate things. I mean, peaceful protest should be allowed in any civilized country, it seems to us. Who is not peaceful, that's another story.
I'll use the words of John Stewart. Je suis confused. Not je suis Charlie Hebdo. I'm confused. I'm confused because I know that there is black and white, and I know there are gray areas, and we know that there are gray areas, but we come to the black or white and we pretend that they are gray, and that really confuses me, personally.
Well, I don't think any kind of activity carried out in a monochrome way will get you anywhere. Life isn't like that. There's just too many things in between, and they need to be properly looked at, and they need to be considered as such. When you get polarization in any country, you know, you get problems. I'm not saying that this country is polarized in the way it was a year or two ago. I think there have been some advances made in that regard. Things are better now than they were a year ago. There's no doubt about that. Things are moving on. But you have suffered from a very high degree of polarization, in my view, for far too long, particularly in a country like Egypt, which is the oldest country in the world, which is the oldest unitary polity in the world. You invented so many things. You invented armies and bureaucracies and heaven knows what else.
Everything that the world is suffering from today.
Yes, well, there you are. You can see I'm a bureaucrat. You see. Maybe in the days of the pharaohs, they might have given me a job. No, but seriously, the situation here should, and I'm pretty sure will get better. But you've suffered this for far too long. This business of polarization, it's not good. I'm not saying necessarily you should start off on some reconciliation campaign. This probably isn't the time. And I'm not talking necessarily only about the Ikhwan. There are many other elements in civil society as well who need to be brought around the table. But, you know, sooner or later, as Egyptians, you know, you have a much better chance of achieving that than almost anybody else, in fact, in this region, or indeed in some other parts of the world. So I hope it will happen soon.
Okay, so I'll take that hopeful high note to conclude, and I thank you very much for your time and for your clear answers to my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ossama, and a real pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
بشكر سيد جيمس موران سفير الاتحاد الأوروبي بمصر. مجموعة من الموضوعات يعني طرح ليها إجابات واضحة وصريحة، ومجموعة من الموضوعات وضع لها المزيد من علامات الاستفهام. تبقى لنا لكي نحاول إزالة علامات الاستفهام والوصول إلى إجابات معه لاحقا، أو من خلال ملاحقة هذه الموضوعات ومتابعتها. ألقاكم بعد الفاصل.